Welcome to the show. It is fantastic to have you joining us today for this deep dive. Right at the top, if you are someone who enjoys dissecting complex, culturally significant ideas and extracting the underlying architecture of the information that's shaping our modern world, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the show.
Yeah, your support is exactly what allows us to keep producing these extensive deep dives.
Exactly. Now, for today's mission, we are looking at a text that is currently generating massive waves across very specific cultural sectors. If you follow the men's rights activist community, or if you're engaged with the discussions happening within the red-pilled manosphere, you have undoubtedly seen the subject of today's deep dive being debated, dissected, and shared.
Oh, absolutely. It is everywhere right now.
It really is. We are undertaking a comprehensive analytical review of a highly provocative new ebook. And this is not just some peripheral text. It's currently serving as a foundational manifesto for those seeking to understand the historical trajectory of our institutions before they were, to use the author's exact phrasing, captured by feminists and Marxists.
Right, and it's a massive piece of work.
Ultra long, incisive, and honestly fascinating. The title of the book is a striking one. It's called Inflated Feminist Ego, Creebly Barkers, Jumped Up by Animus Possession, Misandry, and Female Supremacy Ideology. It is authored by Conrad Riker.
That is, it's quite a title.
It sets the tone immediately. If you are intrigued by the architecture of the arguments we're about to unpack, we highly recommend engaging with the source material directly. You should check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy the book, and follow the author on Substack at Conrad Riker.
And because it is such an intense title, it clearly establishes its rhetorical posture from the very first word. And because of the intense nature of that posture, we really need to establish the operational parameters for our discussion today.
Yes, very important.
The material we are examining is highly politically charged. It is aggressive in its specific claims, and it fundamentally critiques the foundations of modern social, economic, and legal dynamics. Because of this, it is crucial that we explicitly state to you, the listener, that we operate from a position of strict neutrality.
That is the absolute core of our approach. We are not taking sides. We are not endorsing, validating, or condemning the viewpoints presented in the text. Our objective is strictly analytical.
Precisely. Our mission today is to impartially report on the content provided in Riker's book. We're going to unpack his ideological framework, examine the specific data points and anecdotes he utilizes to construct his worldview, and convey his ideas exactly as they are presented in the source text.
Right.
We want to look at this through a clinical structural lens. We want to understand the mechanics of his argument and why it's resonating so powerfully within its target demographic.
And as we mentioned, the text itself is incredibly dense. It constructs this elaborate sociological and psychological worldview. For anyone looking from the outside in, the sheer volume of information can be overwhelming. So our goal is to distill those core arguments so you can understand exactly what is driving this specific cultural conversation without getting lost in the density.
Which is easy to do with a text this long.
Very easy. So to begin, the entire architecture of Riker's argument rests on a foundational psychological concept that he identifies as animus possession. He inextricably links this to what he terms the repressed mother hypothesis. Looking at the text, how does he construct this concept of animus possession, and how does it depart from traditional psychological definitions?
So he takes a concept with roots in Jungian psychology, the animus being the unconscious masculine side of a woman, and he radically scales it up. He takes it from individual psychoanalysis to a full-blown civilizational theory.
A macro level.
Exactly. Within the framework of this book, animus possession describes a psychological and cultural state where the feminine psyche becomes entirely unmoored from biological motherhood. Riker's core assertion is that the maternal drive is an evolutionary imperative. It is an immense source of biological and psychological energy.
And his argument is that this energy doesn't just disappear if a woman doesn't have children, right?
Right. According to his framework, when that deeply ingrained energy is not directed toward the biological raising of children, it transmutes. It becomes what he describes as a predatory managing force. It actively seeks out new domains to mother. In his view, this unmoored energy seizes modern institutions, our workplaces, educational systems, local governments, courts, and warps them into massive bureaucratic instruments of emotional control.
So the argument is that the maternal instinct essentially institutionalizes itself. The state becomes the surrogate child.
That is the absolute essence of his repressed mother hypothesis. He argues that women who reject biological motherhood redirect their innate maternal drive into policy-making, human resources, and the classroom. They effectively become the institutional mothers of everyone else's sons.
But the critical distinction he makes here is the nature of that mothering.
Yes, and this is key. According to the text, this displaced maternal energy does not seek to raise these boys to be resilient, independent men. Instead, it seeks to cultivate compliance. It seeks to raise them as dependent, emotionally manageable infants.
He constructs a very stark binary to illustrate this dynamic. The text suggests that society is being actively divided into two distinct categories. On one side of this binary, you have infants.
Right.
In his framework, this category primarily encompasses women, who the system deems entitled to perpetual protection, specialized resources, and an environment of absolute emotional safety. And on the other side of the binary, you have predators.
Which is how he categorizes men.
Exactly. According to Riker, within an institutionally mother society, men exist primarily to be managed, taxed, blamed, and ultimately punished if they deviate from compliance. He argues that this maternal state does not genuinely protect society. It merely manages it by forcing a prioritization of emotional safety over objective merit and psychological resilience.
If we follow his logic, the natural conclusion of this dynamic is an entirely infantilized society. It's a societal structure where traditional male competence, stoicism, and assertive energy are not just undervalued, they are viewed as inherent threats to the mandated emotional safety of the infants.
And he anchors this theoretical framework in reality by pointing to several specific examples of institutional resource allocation. A prominent example he highlights involves a specific $4.2 million initiative in New York City.
Oh, this is a very detailed section of the book.
Yeah. The text details how, in 2022, the city elected to defund a men's wellness initiative. This was a program structured to offer tangible job training and mental health support for at-risk males. And the author emphasizes the stark reality of what replaced it. It was replaced with a women's healing garden.
A garden.
Yes, a $4.2 million garden outfitted with meditation labyrinths and crystal healing workshops. The author places this resource reallocation directly next to the statistics regarding climbing male suicide rates. He uses it to argue that the system views male crisis as a nuisance, while vast public funds are diverted to subsidize female emotional validation through dirt paths and crystals.
He utilizes that specific resource pivot to illustrate his claim that male suffering is rendered completely invisible by the maternal state. And he also expands this critique internationally, looking at a BBC documentary that profiled Iceland.
The framing of that documentary is heavily scrutinized in the text.
It is. The BBC aired a piece celebrating Iceland's all-female government. The overarching narrative claimed that they had successfully engineered a softer, kinder society. The author challenges this media narrative by injecting specific socioeconomic data that the documentary ostensibly omitted.
Right, the outcomes.
Exactly. He points to statistics indicating that under the administration of this all-female government, male life expectancy in Iceland actually experienced a drop of 3 years. Concurrently, male unemployment rates rose and male educational dropout rates spiked significantly.
The author notes this with a heavy dose of irony. The implication is that because the female leadership felt seen and felt heard, the experiment was lauded as a massive success by the media, completely regardless of the objective, measurable decline in the quality of life for the male population.
And this dynamic, where subjective feelings override objective outcomes, is the perfect bridge into understanding exactly how these institutions exert and maintain their control once they've been captured.
Which introduces the text's concept of the crybully.
The concept of the crybully is central to understanding the operational mechanics of Riker's thesis. He defines a crybully as an individual who consciously or subconsciously weaponizes tears, perceived fragility, and an assumption of victimhood to exert authoritarian control over a situation or an individual.
So it's the fusion of apparent weakness with absolute, unassailable power.
Precisely. The mechanism is simple, but devastatingly effective, according to the text. You utilize tears to initiate a social or professional attack. Because the institutional framework has already been primed to prioritize female emotional safety above all else, the person you are crying about, usually a male, is automatically designated as the aggressor.
Without any requirement for objective evidence.
Zero evidence required.
To substantiate this, the book pulls in statistical data regarding how emotion is processed in professional environments. The author cites a 2015 study from the University of Stirling, which concluded that women are 4.2 times more likely to cry during conflicts than men.
But the true linchpin of his argument is a 2020 study from the Journal of Organizational Behavior.
Right. The author highlights the finding that 94% of human resources mediators will instinctively side with the individual who cries during a dispute, completely overriding the objective facts or data points of the actual conflict.
When we examine those two data points together through the lens of the author's framework, a disturbing picture of conflict resolution emerges. If 94% of institutional mediators side with the person producing tears, then crying ceases to be merely an involuntary expression of distress.
It transforms into a tactic.
It becomes an optimized, highly effective strategy for dominating professional disputes. The text argues that this is not an accidental byproduct of a kinder workplace, but a recognized and utilized tactic. To support this claim of conscious utilization, Riker points to a leaked 2020 internal HR memo from Google.
Yes, this was fascinating.
According to his analysis of the memo, female employees were explicitly advised to leverage emotional expression when navigating disputes over performance reviews. Conversely, male employees in similar situations were instructed to rely strictly on data-driven rebuttals.
The author interprets this as institutional confirmation of the cry-bully playbook. It's an asymmetric warfare tactic where one side is allowed to use emotional distress as a trump card, while the other is restricted to spreadsheets and logic, which are ultimately ignored anyway.
Because the tears always win in that framework.
Exactly. And the text suggests this tactical advantage isn't limited just to crying. Riker outlines a comprehensive, systemic process of social elimination that he labels the GSR cycle. That stands for gossip, shame, and rally.
The GSR cycle is the text's sociological blueprint for understanding modern cancel culture. What is particularly notable is how deeply the author roots this cycle in evolutionary psychology. He draws a direct line back to ancestral primate environments.
How does he make that connection?
Well, in those environments, he argues, physical dominance was not the primary tool utilized by females to manage group dynamics. Instead, they relied on complex grooming networks, subtle social consensus, and relational aggression. Fast forward to the digital age, and the author posits that these ancient covert networks have simply been digitized and scaled up.
So they now form the underlying architecture of what we casually call cancel culture.
Yes, according to his framework, the evolutionary purpose of this behavior remains the exact same. It's to tightly control the community, to strictly enforce ideological conformity, and most crucially, to identify and socially eliminate high-status men who might pose a threat to that established emotional dominance.
The text breaks down the mechanics of this GSR cycle in a very methodical way. The first phase is gossip. The author describes this as the covert building of consensus. It happens in private, decentralized spaces, encrypted WhatsApp groups, closed Discord servers, hushed conversations. It's the gathering of informal, unverified complaints.
And then comes the second phase.
Shame. This is the moment the private consensus is weaponized and brought into the public square. The author notes that this usually occurs on female-dominated visual platforms like Instagram, where the target is publicly branded with socially devastating labels. Words like toxic, creepy, or unsafe.
Which leads right into the final phase.
Rally. This is the synchronization of the mob. The network operates as a unified entity to demand immediate, devastating punishment, usually termination of employment or complete social exile. And the defining characteristic of the rally phase is the demand that this punishment be executed before any formal investigation or due process can occur.
According to the text, the true danger of the GSR cycle lies in the asymmetrical standards of behavior it ultimately enforces. It creates an environment where identical actions are judged entirely differently based on the gender of the actor.
The author illustrates this asymmetry by contrasting two deeply jarring anecdotes originating from the exact same school district.
The juxtaposition he uses here is quite striking.
It is. He details the case of a male teacher in Oregon in 2018. The incident revolved around the teacher wearing a t-shirt to class that featured an illustration of Yoda from the Star Wars franchise. A female student reported to the administration that the shirt made her feel uncomfortable.
Just the word uncomfortable.
That's all it took. According to the text, the school administration validated this subjective feeling immediately. Without initiating a formal investigation and without any evidence of objective wrongdoing or violation of policy, the male teacher was suspended and subsequently fired.
The author frames this as a man's career being instantly destroyed by the unassailable doctrine of emotional safety.
Exactly. The author then contrasts this outcome with the behavior of a female principal within the same Oregon school district.
The author details how this female principal allegedly engaged in highly inappropriate conduct. This included sending unsolicited nude photographs to her male subordinates and explicitly demanding physical back rubs during mandatory staff meetings.
Which is completely insane.
It is. And when a male subordinate utilized the proper channels to file a formal harassment complaint, the text notes that the Human Resources Department categorized the entire pattern of behavior as a mere misunderstanding. Not only was the principal insulated from termination, but she was subsequently promoted.
While the male victim, conversely, was formally advised to be more resilient.
Exactly. The author uses this specific juxtaposition to argue that we exist in a system where female emotion is treated as sacred and unchallengeable, while male reality and documented evidence are treated with immediate suspicion.
This suppression of objective reality leads directly into his next major area of focus: institutional capture, with a specific lens on how this ideology has dismantled the concept of merit in academia and the hard sciences.
The book mounts a rigorous critique against the modern implementation of equity policies. It argues that they function not as equalizers, but as mechanisms that actively punish objective competence. The author views this as a direct threat to the foundational enterprise of scientific discovery.
And he brings receipts for this claim.
He relies on a 2023 paper published in the journal Nature. This research analyzed the outcomes of applying strict gender quotas to the distribution of scientific grant funding. The findings cited by the author revealed that these quotas resulted in an 18% reduction in the average publication impact of the funded projects.
The text points to this 18% drop in scientific impact as quantifiable proof that prioritizing gender over merit actively degrades the quality of scientific output. To humanize the statistic, the author shares a narrative about a male biologist he encountered.
A very frustrating anecdote.
This individual possessed 5 years of postdoctoral experience, had a history of publishing in highly respected journals like Nature, and managed a lab generating promising, robust data. Despite these objective qualifications, he was denied critical funding 3 consecutive times.
And the reason given.
The author states that the reviewer's feedback explicitly noted, quote, "We've already met our female quota." The text interprets this as the ultimate institutional betrayal. The data, the potential for discovery, and the objective merit were entirely irrelevant. The only variable that mattered to the institution was his gender.
The author views this dismissal of contemporary merit as part of a larger retrospective project, which he refers to as herstory. He defines this as the active ideological rewriting of the historical record with the specific intent to erase or minimize male achievement.
He points to a 2023 survey to demonstrate the efficacy of this curriculum shift. The survey data indicated that 64% of college-educated women believe that men contributed nothing significant to the advancement of science or technology.
64%.
The author presents that figure as evidence of a profound educational failure. He immediately contrasts it with the historical reality that men have been awarded 98% of all Nobel Prizes in physics. He questions how an entire generation of supposedly highly educated individuals could operate under the assumption that the foundational pillars of modern civilization, electricity, the internal combustion engine, antibiotics, the internet, were somehow purloined from women or materialized by accident.
He highlights a specific anecdote from a college panel to illustrate the depth of this historical revisionism. During a discussion on the history of electrical engineering, a female student reportedly argued that Nikola Tesla did not genuinely invent alternating current. Instead, she proposed that he merely serve as a vessel for feminine energy frequencies.
That is just wow.
The text utilizes that anecdote as a prime example of replacing documented empirical history with what the author considers ideological fiction. He meticulously catalogs several instances of this alleged historical revisionism.
Like the Sparta myth.
Yes, he critiques the contemporary feminist framing of ancient Sparta as a historical matriarchy. He notes the irony that while Spartan women possessed the right to own property, they were entirely excluded from voting, serving in the military, or participating in public assemblies, which are the actual levers of state power.
And he also cites an incident at the Smithsonian Institution. According to the book, an educational exhibit detailing the engineering innovations of the Industrial Revolution was allegedly dismantled following complaints that it was too focused on male inventors. According to the text, it was replaced with an exhibit highlighting the role of women distributing warm soup in factory dining areas.
The text interprets the elevation of soup distribution to the level of industrial engineering as a deliberate insult to the reality of physical labor and innovation. He even extends this critique to the arts, referencing a 2023 theatrical production of Shakespeare's Macbeth.
It'll be environmentalist angle.
Right. In this adaptation, the character of Lady Macbeth was entirely reimagined as a progressive, nature-loving environmentalist, while Macbeth was reduced to a one-dimensional, violent enforcer of toxic male rule.
But the author does not view these as isolated incidents in the culture. He traces the origin of this epistemic shift directly back to the university classroom. He highlights that women currently hold 55% of all faculty positions across U.S. colleges. Under this demographic shift, the author argues, the fundamental nature of the classroom has been transformed from a crucible of rigorous, objective debate into an environment that mirrors a therapy circle.
He argues that the very methodologies of critical thought are under attack. He points specifically to the abandonment of the trivium, the classical educational foundation comprising grammar, logic, and rhetoric. According to the text, these structured, objective modes of inquiry are being actively dismissed and pathologized by modern academia as manifestations of toxic masculinity.
To illustrate the real-world absurdity of this epistemic shift, he shares an anecdote concerning a graduate-level physics student at the University of Colorado. The student, a female, reportedly suffered an emotional breakdown in class upon receiving a failing grade for a structural bridge design project.
And her defense of the project was remarkable.
When asked to defend the structural integrity of her failing design, she argued that the grade was unfair because her project had, quote, centered empathy.
Centered empathy. For a bridge.
The author uses that phrase as a profound indictment of the modern educational system. The text implies that subjective feelings and empathetic intentions possess absolutely zero tensile strength. They cannot prevent a steel bridge from collapsing under the kinetic weight of a freight train.
But this is the exact epistemic invasion the author is mapping out. A paradigm where internal feelings are permitted to completely override external objective facts. And the book argues that this doctrine of emotional supremacy does not remain contained within the university system. It flows outward, deeply infecting the broader economy.
Which leads us directly into his exploration of the consumer gynocracy and the mental health industrial complex.
In this section, the author makes sweeping macroeconomic claims, framing modern consumer behavior as a form of economic parasitism. The text relies on market data indicating that women allegedly control 80% of global consumer spending, while simultaneously holding 70% of all consumer debt.
And they are cited as the absolute dominant demographic driving the $1.2 trillion luxury fashion industry.
The author synthesizes these statistics to paint a very specific economic portrait. He describes a societal structure where vast amounts of capital are expended recklessly on cosmetic alterations, academically dubious degrees, and continuous emotional validation.
Yet, he notes, the demographic driving this debt-fueled consumption simultaneously vocalizes intense critiques of toxic capitalism, entirely outsourcing the responsibility for their financial choices.
And the author argues that the zenith of this economic irrationality is found within the $4.5 trillion global wellness industry, a market that is 85% female-driven. He categorizes this entire sector as a trillion-dollar debt-financed placebo effect.
He points a highly critical finger at brands like Gwyneth Paltrow's Goop, specifically mocking the sale of $200 vaginal jade eggs. The text dismisses the entire enterprise as hocus pocus with a MasterCard.
What is analytically interesting is how the author connects this specific macroeconomic behavior back to the physiological reality of emotional dysregulation. The book delves into the neurobiology of this, specifically pointing to the limbic system, which serves as the brain's emotional processing center.
He references a study from the University of Sussex demonstrating that women are 37% more likely to engage in impulsive purchasing behavior when experiencing emotional distress.
The author reframes the casual concept of retail therapy. He argues that this behavior represents an outsourcing of internal emotional dysregulation to the external retail market. In his view, the female limbic system routinely overrides rational, long-term economic planning, transforming temporary mood fluctuations into massive shopping sprees that are ultimately subsidized by the accumulation of debt.
He uses a very evocative phrase to describe how the traditional stoic masculine ideal is viewed within this new economic matrix. He claims men are increasingly treated merely as a wallet with a pulse,
valued only for their capacity to generate the resources required to fund this limbic consumption.
But the author pushes this concept of unchecked emotional dysregulation even further, examining how it has profoundly corrupted the justice system, resulting in what he terms massive legal asymmetry. He spends considerable time analyzing the deployment of the PMS defense in criminal trials.
The text argues that the legal system has been compromised to the extent that it now prioritizes the validation of female emotional states over the objective reality of male victimization, even in instances of severe violence.
The author cites a highly disturbing 2017 legal case from the United Kingdom to illustrate this. A woman named Ruth Williams attacked her landlord, stabbing him 17 times. During the trial, her legal defense did not deny the act. Instead, they argued that she was suffering from premenstrual dysphoric disorder.
And the outcome of this case is presented as a catastrophic failure of equal justice. The presiding judge accepted the hormonal defense. The perpetrator did not receive a prison sentence for the brutal stabbing. Instead, she was assigned community service, which specifically involved performing gardening duties.
The author points out the profound absurdity of a system where inflicting 17 stab wounds results in light landscaping work, provided the perpetrator possesses a recognized hormonal alibi.
And he pairs this with a 2019 case originating in Texas.
In this instance, a woman was on trial for shooting her husband in the back while he was asleep. The defense strategy centered on the claim that she was menstruating and experiencing intense emotional instability. The jury ultimately acquitted her.
The author emphasizes the stark double standard here. He notes that the legal system completely rejects the concept of a testosterone rage defense. He argues that if a male defendant attempted to excuse premeditated violence by citing hormonal fluctuations, the system would instantly reject it and mandate severe incarceration.
The author suggests that this legal asymmetry is merely the most extreme manifestation of a broader cultural phenomenon. He explores how this weaponization of emotional distress permeates everyday social currency, specifically analyzing the rise of trauma bonding and the proliferation of self-diagnosed performative PTSD on social media platforms like TikTok.
The text observes a trend where individuals systematically instruct one another on how to deploy clinical psychiatric terminology. Claiming to be triggered or traumatized in response to minor social disagreements or constructive criticism.
By co-opting the vocabulary of severe psychological injury, the author argues the user effectively constructs an impenetrable shield of social immunity. It grants them absolute freedom from behavioral criticism, personal consequences, and basic accountability. Because to question a claim of trauma is to immediately violate the supreme directive of emotional safety.
We've now followed the author's analysis through the capture of the workplace, the ideological shift in academia, the debt-driven consumer economy, and the asymmetric legal system. This brings us to the arena where the text argues this ideology impacts men most acutely and personally.
The collapse of the sexual marketplace. The author's thesis is that the modern dating ecosystem has been completely destabilized by unchecked hypergamy and deliberate mate suppression.
For those deeply immersed in these discussions, the term is familiar, but to ensure we're all looking at it through the text-specific lens, hypergamy is defined here as the deeply ingrained evolutionary instinct, primarily in females, to seek a reproductive partner of equal or higher socioeconomic status.
The author utilizes the raw data generated by modern dating applications to argue that the current market is not merely difficult, but structurally rigged. He points to a comprehensive 2022 study published in Nature Human Behavior.
The data from this study indicates a severe Pareto distribution on platforms like Tinder, revealing that a full 50% of the female user base actively competes for the exact same top 20% of the male user base.
The author describes this dynamic not as a search for romantic partnership, but as a coordinated extraction raid. 50% of the female population relentlessly pursuing the top 20% of men. And the text argues that this incredibly skewed market is further distorted by rampant misrepresentation.
He incorporates data from YouGov indicating that 68% of female users actively lie about their physical age on these platforms, while an astonishing 92% deliberately inflate their income and educational credentials to artificially boost their market value.
To illuminate the psychological mechanics driving this behavior, the text details a highly illustrative sociological experiment conducted on one of these platforms. A male user decided to stress test the market's priorities by creating two distinct dating profiles.
The first profile was an honest, modest reflection of his reality. He presented himself as a struggling artist who painted community murals and relied on food stamps. Despite being physically attractive in the photos, this honest profile received absolutely zero inbound messages or matches.
The second profile featured the exact same photographs of the exact same man. However, the biographical text simply labeled him as a discreet crypto investor. The profile offered zero verifiable proof of this wealth. No linked portfolios, no photographs of assets, just the linguistic suggestion of high status.
and the text highlights the explosive results of this minor textual change. The crypto investor profile received 147 messages within a 3-hour window. The author notes that this influx included 3 explicit marriage proposals and an inquiry from a user asking if he possessed a private jet.
The author concludes from this experiment that modern female hypergamy functions less like a search for a compatible life partner and more like a predatory optimizing algorithm. He draws a direct parallel to the psychological mechanisms utilized by casino slot machines.
Specifically, intermittent reinforcement. The text argues that the users on these platforms are not seeking emotional connection. They are rapidly swiping to locate the next status trigger. The goal is to maximize the potential return on investment while offering zero corresponding reciprocity.
The text uses a very specific metaphor, stating that these users are stress testing their desirability in the marketplace, much like a queen bee ruthlessly inspecting drones.
But the author's analysis of this hypergamous instinct extends far beyond the realm of casual dating applications. He argues that it has fundamentally corrupted the biological and legal structure of family formation.
He turns his attention to the modern family court system and the cultural elevation of empowered single motherhood. The book references a specific online community, the subreddit r/children by choice, noting how users frequently boast about their ability to procure genetic material and raise children entirely independent of male involvement.
However, the author immediately counters this narrative of total independence with a stark demographic reality. He cites a 2022 statistical analysis from Pew Research indicating that 87% of the individuals who publicly celebrate this empowered, independent single motherhood eventually utilize the legal system to sue the biological father for maximum child support.
The text frames this 87% statistic as the ultimate state-sanctioned expression of hypergamy devoid of accountability. According to the author's framework, the current legal and social system allows the extraction of the biological and emotional reward of reproduction while entirely outsourcing the financial burden, the consequences, and the day-to-day reality of co-parenting to the subjugated father and the state apparatus.
It is presented as a completely rigged, unwinnable game for the average man. Having mapped out this pervasive institutional capture, the text moves to a critical question. How does this ideology maintain its iron grip on the broader culture? How does it silence dissent?
Which leads us to the author's analysis of the media matrix and the mechanics of the feminist inquisition. The core concept he utilizes here is mass formation psychosis.
The author begins to synthesize his previous theoretical frameworks, the evolutionary mechanics of the GSR cycle, the concept of civilizational animus possession, and the optimized tactics of the Krybuli playbook, and he applies them to the macro-level behavior of digital mobs.
He relies on 2022 demographic data from Pew Research, indicating that a staggering 87% of synchronized social media outreach mobs are female-led.
That 87% figure is crucial to his argument. The text asserts that this is the gossip-shame rally cycle, operating not just in a local human resources department, but on a massive industrialized global scale.
To demonstrate the terrifying efficiency of this decentralized execution, the author dissects the infamous case of Justine Sacco. Sacco was a public relations professional who posted a poorly considered joke on Twitter just moments before boarding a 12-hour international flight to Cape Town.
The text emphasizes that while she was physically suspended in the air, completely disconnected from the internet and unable to defend herself, a synchronized digital mob, which the author points out was demographically dominated by women, coalesced around her tweet.
They built an instant global moral crusade. By the time the aircraft touched down in South Africa, her entire life had been dismantled. She was fired from her job, publicly disowned by her family, and trending globally as a target of absolute hatred.
The author notes the chilling efficiency. There was no trial, no opportunity for defense, no consideration of intent. It was simply a hive mind execution. The text views this iteration of cancel culture as an incredibly potent mechanism for maintaining social control.
Through this specific analytical lens, the author mounts a severe critique of the Me Too movement. He argues that the foundational premise of the movement, the mandate to believe all women unconditionally, functions to completely dismantle the foundational legal presumption of innocence.
He points to data compiled by the FBI and the National Crime Victimization Survey, which estimate the rate of demonstrably false accusations to be somewhere between 3% and 10%.
The author focuses intensely on that metric. Between 3 and 10 out of every 100 accused men are facing entirely fabricated charges. That represents an enormous number of completely devastated lives and careers. but the true source of the author's outrage is the lack of systemic reciprocity.
The text states that 92% of the individuals who levy these demonstrably false accusations face absolutely zero legal or professional consequences for their perjury.
He points to the catastrophic Rolling Stone UVA fraternity hoax as the ultimate, undeniable proof of this systemic immunity.
The UVA incident is a cornerstone of his argument regarding media complicity. The magazine Rolling Stone published a horrifying, deeply detailed account of a gang rape at a University of Virginia fraternity. The story ignited a national firestorm. However, subsequent, rigorous journalistic and legal investigations proved that the entire narrative was completely fabricated.
The author highlights his profound anger over the institutional response. Even after the story was definitively debunked and proven to be a lie, the publication left the article live on their website for over a year. The fraternity was dissolved, the academic and personal lives of the accused men were utterly ruined, yet the editors and the individual who fabricated the story faced virtually no meaningful consequences.
The text uses this event to argue that the concept of a he said, she said dynamic is now a total cultural fraud. The author asserts that it presents an illusion of neutrality, while in reality, the fundamental burden of proof has been entirely inverted.
Within this new paradigm, men are considered inherently guilty until they can definitively prove their innocence. And crucially, as the author points out, even when that innocence is conclusively proven, the social and professional stain remains permanently attached to the man, while the false accuser simply walks away back into the crowd, entirely scot-free.
Having meticulously mapped out what he perceives as a sprawling, systemic, and hostile capture of Western civilization, tracing the ideology from its roots in the feminine psyche, through the educational system, the courts, the economy, and the dating market, the author must inevitably pivot.
What is the proposed solution to this immense architecture of control? This brings us to the final and perhaps most vital section of the book, the Manifesto for Men. What is the explicit call to action?
The author makes a distinct shift from diagnosis to prescription. The very first directive he issues to his male readership is an absolute command to cease all appeasement of the current system. He demands an end to the reflexive apologizing.
His central thesis for action is summarized in his statement. The path forward is not a violent revolution. It is a quiet restoration. The text explicitly instructs men to stop trying to reform the captured institutions from within, and instead to begin the arduous process of building parallel institutions entirely outside the parameters of the gynocratic matrix.
This concept of parallel institution building is critical to understanding the author's proposed end state. He is not advocating for a reactionary takeover. He is advocating for secession from the dominant emotional paradigm.
He extensively unpacks the necessity of establishing robust fathers networks that bypass traditional family courts, men's groups focused on objective skill building, independent media ecosystems that refuse to adhere to the GSR cycle, and the creation of strict, truth-based communities that fundamentally reject the premise that emotional validation supersedes objective reality.
Furthermore, he advocates for a radical psychological shift, a complete and total refusal to ever apologize for inherent male biological nature.
He spends a significant portion of this final chapter discussing how the modern educational and psychiatric systems actively pathologize standard healthy boy behavior. The author lists traits like boundless physical energy, a high tolerance for risk-taking, intense intragroup competitiveness, and advanced spatial reasoning.
He knows that these are the exact evolutionary traits that drove exploration and built the physical infrastructure of civilization. Yet today, within the captured classroom, these traits are instantly labeled as toxic, disruptive, or aggressive.
The text points out that boys exhibiting these traits are routinely medicated into compliance or discipline until their natural energy is broken. The author's manifesto demands that men reclaim these traits without a shred of guilt.
The text argues forcefully that you cannot build, maintain, or defend a civilization using empathy and tears. Survival requires physical strength, emotional stoicism, and rigorous, unyielding logic. At the absolute core of this final manifesto is a philosophical refusal to be complicit in one's own civilizational erasure.
The author is demanding that men recognize that the collective, historical guilt currently assigned to them by modern society is entirely illegitimate and purposefully designed to induce compliance. There is a specific message to the reader that I want to highlight because it serves as the emotional and philosophical anchor of the entire book.
Yes, his message directly to the reader.
The author speaks directly to the reader, stating, "You are not broken. You are not toxic. You are not the problem." It's a powerful rhetorical reversal. The goal he establishes for his audience is not chaotic destruction or online trolling. It is a disciplined, stoic restoration of the foundational pillars of the West: logic, precise language, objective law, and unapologetic leadership.
He tells his male readers to stop financially and emotionally funding the very system that seeks to eliminate them, to wake up from the collective mass formation psychosis, and to firmly stand their ground.
When you look at the entirety of the text, it represents a sweeping, incredibly intense, and deliberately controversial worldview. The author has taken disparate threads: evolutionary psychology, primate behavior, human resources data, macroeconomic trends, dating app statistics, and cultural anecdotes, and woven them into a massive, unified theory attempting to explain Western decline through the lens of unchecked, institutionalized female dominance.
It is an immense amount of ideological architecture to process.
In our deep dive today, we've explored the foundational concept of animus possession and the repressed mother hypothesis. We've dissected the tactical utilization of the Crybully playbook and the evolutionary roots of the gossip, shame, rally cycle. We've examined the text's claims regarding the intentional death of merit in academia, the reality of a debt-fueled consumer gynocracy, the collapse of the sexual marketplace driven by hypergamy, and the unyielding media matrix of the feminist inquisition.
Whether you find the author's arguments to be a profound, deeply compelling revelation of hidden truths, or whether you find them highly offensive, controversial, and deeply flawed, one thing remains absolutely certain: understanding the architecture of this specific framework is crucial.
You must engage with the ideas in this book if you want to accurately understand the motivations, the language, and the worldview of a massive, rapidly growing segment of modern cultural discourse currently operating within the manosphere.
To leave you with a final provocative thought to consider on your own time, moving beyond the specific gender dynamics proposed in the text. If the foundational institutions of our society are indeed undergoing a permanent shift toward prioritizing subjective emotional safety and validation over objective reality and rigorous, unrestricted debate, regardless of exactly which demographic is driving that shift, what is the ultimate long-term impact on the survival of our civilization?
It's a massive question.
How does any society hope to sustain complex technological innovation, objective scientific progress, and a fair, balanced legal system if the subjective feelings of the individual are consistently permitted by the state to override empirical facts?
That is the ultimate existential question this text forces its readers to confront. And if you want to dig deeper into the granular data, the extensive anecdotes, and these explosive, highly controversial ideas, you absolutely need to read the source material and evaluate it for yourself. Please check out Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks to buy Conrad Reicher's ebook. To continue following the evolution of his arguments, be sure to follow the author at Conrad Reicher on his Substack. Thank you so much for joining us and dedicating your time to this incredibly intense, complex analytical journey today. Please remember to like this video and subscribe to the show so we can continue bringing you these expensive, in-depth breakdowns of the most fascinating and world-shaping source materials. We will see you on the next deep dive.